Natchez, Mississippi. Summer 1847. Midnight, the river is a black mirror. Across the bluffs, magnolia leaves stick to the air like a held breath. In the quiet between the cicadas, a door below the Mason house opens and closes, twice, and in the brick, vaulted cellar that once held ice and barrels of brine, someone begins to scream. Not a single note, not drunkenness from the riverfront, not a fox in the cane, not a childbirth cry. A sustained, shuddering sound that claws at the night and makes the servants in the quarters fix their eyes on the dirt, whispering a psalm. In the big house above, a tall woman in a pale dress and gloves that reach her elbows pauses at the banister listening, like a conductor before the downbeat. Her name is Arabella Mason. Widow, 29 or 35, no two accounts agree. The richest woman on a bluff crowded with rich women. She inherited the house, the fields, and the people who worked them when fever took her husband in 1842, and everyone in Natchez says she carries her grief like a ruby at her throat. They also say, quietly, in the vestibule, after service, that she keeps a private study beneath the kitchen, where no one goes unless summoned, and where barrels of spirits and quicklime are delivered as often as sugar and tea. In a sealed county ledger, page spine split with damp, there is a single line dated August 3, 1845. On complaint of a physician, unnatural operations at Mason Place. The magistrate's name is smeared by a thumb. The complaint itself is missing. In a doctor's journal discovered in a trunk after his sister's death, there's 1/2 page undated, in a cramped, practiced hand. No patient consent. I am sickened. Horrors done in the name of anatomy. Filed report with Magistrate L. If I am mislaid, let God judge those who bury the truth. He was young. He signed his initials only. He was last seen walking down the hill, toward the courthouse by the river, hat pushed low. A week later, his horse was found tied to a post at the wharf, its reins gnawed and its saddle missing. The river gives up what it wants. That week, it gave up nothing. Downstairs in the cellar, the voices rise. Then, there is a shifting, a peculiar hush, and only the rustle of cloth and the clink of glass remain. Natchez in the 1840s is a kingdom of cotton and illusion, where fortunes grow from stolen hands in fields that bloom like snow, and the big houses preen beneath porticos, while just beyond the hedges, people are worked and sold and punished in the heat. Along the riverfront at Natchez, under the hill, gamblers and drifters argue beneath the lanterns. Up above, planters seal their ledgers and seal their hearts. Where officials are concerned, anatomy is a delicate word. In Boston or Philadelphia, medical men plead for bodies to learn their trade. In New Orleans, students whisper about resurrectionists who pull the dead from potter's fields. In private parlors, respectable people marvel at jars with snakes and strange fish suspended in alcohol. The law is a tangle of don'ts and unless, and what is forbidden in public has a way of proceeding through private doors. Between 1842 and 1847, if the whispers are to be believed, a wealthy widow in Natchez took subjects from among the people she owned to practice anatomical studies, a phrase that makes bloodless what witnesses allege was anything but. Some nights, neighbors heard crying from the cellar. A local physician tried to stop it. Then he disappeared. After the war, when Reconstruction threatened to pry open every locked drawer in the South, plantation records from the Mason place were burned. By whom, no one will say. The cemetery plot Arabella purchased in 1850 bears no name. The stone is blank. There are facts. There are missing pages. There are names that turn to fog as soon as you speak them. And there is that cellar, sealed twice, once with bricks, and once with silence. So who was Arabella Mason? What, exactly, was she doing below the kitchen at midnight? Why did a young doctor vanish after accusing one of Natchez's finest? And why does the ground still soften after rain in one particular corner of that yard? As if the earth remembers more than the people do. We are going to open a door most would rather keep shut. We're going to sift the surviving records, the oral histories no one wrote down for fear of looking directly at them, and the ledgers someone tried to erase, not to gawk, but to understand how a woman could turn cruelty into science and a community could decide to forget. But why did this happen? And why was it erased from history? Before we continue, If this story intrigues you, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest historical mysteries. And tell us what city or state you're listening from. We love hearing from our community of history enthusiasts. To understand Arabella, you have to understand Natchez at the very hour it was building its empire and sealing its fate. The 1840s in Mississippi were the apotheosis of a machine, cotton seeded in the Deep South, sold to mills in Manchester and Lowell, funded by banks in New Orleans and New York. Natchez gathered the profits at the summit of the bluff, each house a proclamation. Greek Revival columns, polished mahogany, mirrors tall enough to double the company. On Sunday, the pews were occupied by men in broadcloth and women in watered silk, and in the galleries sat the people who hewed the wood, fixed the dresses, cooked the food, and did the labor that made all of it possible. The polite word was plantation. The honest word was slavery. Arabella did not build that system. She inherited it. She was born, by most accounts, to a family that made its money not in cotton, but in the trimmings of cotton, the shipping, the storage, perhaps an interest in a steam packet that ran between Natchez and New Orleans. A cousin married a man in sugar. An uncle kept a counting house. The Masons, or the family she married into that, took their name from the craft they did not practice. Were not the oldest names in town, but by the time of her marriage they were wealthy enough to call their place simply the Mason place, as if everyone else's land was just an unpainted fence. Arabella married young. Some say she was taught French at a finishing school in New Orleans and could recite Voltaire. Others say her letters were marked by the neatness of someone who did not write very often. She liked order. She liked glass. When she took walks she collected objects, feathers, seed pods, odd stones, and arranged them in the cabinet her husband bought her, with little labels in a fine hand. The cabinet is remembered because it stood in the front parlor, where ladies looked upon it and said, "How diligent," while their husbands counted the costs of a new gin. The house itself was typical of the bluff, high ceilings to dissipate heat, a service wing tucked to the side, a carriage house, an ice house that was an extravagance more than a necessity. In that part of Mississippi, proper basements are rare, but brick-vaulted, cool rooms were not unheard of, especially in houses built by men who wanted to say they had something no one else did. The Mason basement is remembered because the yard above it sank like a shallow bowl when it rained, and because the servants said it was a cold place, even in August. Illness was a constant in those years. Fevers came up the river on boats and seeped across the fields. Doctors treated them with knives and mercury. People bled and were told it would lighten their humors. Babies died and women were told it was God's will. The public face of medicine involved leeches and lancets and the latest tincture from Paris. The private face involved obtaining bodies, legally if you could, illegally if you could not, to study the architecture of the human frame. In some cities, executed criminals were allotted for dissection. In many more, the dead were resurrected from their graves by men who worked by lantern light, sold by the pound to instructors who went on to shape the next generation of surgeons. The outrage when the dead were white was spectacular. When the dead were black, it was treated as unfortunate commerce. All of this is the backdrop to a woman who, in the space of a few months in 1842, lost her husband and gained command of a farm of hundreds of acres and dozens of people. He had been older by a decade or more. Fever took him on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, the overseer brought her the account books and waited to be told whether anything would change. She turned each page, ran her finger down the columns, and told him to keep the gins running. In grief, people find routines. Arabella found study. Before there was a locked cellar, there was a shelf of books in her cabinet, spines turned so the titles faced the room as if daring anyone to comment. Crania Americana, an English anatomy manual, plates engraved with cross sections like maps. A French volume, Buffon, perhaps, or Cuvier, on comparative anatomy, how the bones of the cat echoed the bones of the man. A slim book of phrenology with a head divided into tidy provinces. Conscientiousness, secretiveness, destructiveness, promising that character could be read like a chart. There was a subscription to a medical journal out of New Orleans. The post rider came in a haze of dust each month, and someone in the house signed for the small brown, wrapped parcel and carried it to the parlor. Those books were not illegal. More than one parlor in Natchez displayed them. What troubled people, at first as a curiosity, then as a rising rumor, was what followed. Arabella purchased jars, hand-blown with ground glass stoppers. She ordered strong spirits by the barrel, supposedly for preservative work. She hired a mason to shore up the north wall of the basement and to add a brick drain that led to the creek. She had new shelves built below that did not match the kitchen shelves above. She began to call the cellar her study, and when someone asked why she needed a key on a blue ribbon around her neck to go to the place where potatoes were stored, she smiled in a polite, closed way and said, "A lady keeps a tidy pantry." There were other things too. A quiet displacing of folk with names who had been on the place for years. A woman in her 30s, Dinah, whom the river bought from Virginia, and who had midwifed more than one baby on the place, sold south suddenly to a cousin near Bayou Sara, or so the overseer said. A boy, Peter, who laughed too loud when he should have kept quiet, sent to a trader and never seen again. Though a man on the neighboring place told his wife he saw Peter on the path to the big house 3 nights later, led by a man with a lantern, when someone asked Arabella, delicately, at a tea, about the little labels in her cabinet shifting from plants to specimens. She said she hoped to donate a collection to a young medical gentleman in town. Scientific charity, she called it. The lady of the house opposite praised her with a calculating glint in her eye and later told her cook not to send the little girl who brought eggs near the Mason kitchen door after dusk. This was Natchez, respectable on the surface, ritualized, layered with wealth, anxious underneath. The war that would crack it wide open had not yet come. The fear was already there. The sequence begins, as best anyone can reconstruct, with a death that gave permission. In the early weeks of 1842, a fever ran through the Mason quarters. It started with a boy in the trash yard who could not keep food down and ended with 3 people in the burial ground on the rise near the cane. The overseer said it was colic and bad air. The doctor, who came in a gig with fresh, shaved cheeks and a square of linen tied around his throat, said it was cholera. He had seen it upriver, the same blue mouths, the same eyes so wide they looked like saints' eyes in a church painting. He did what he could. It was not much. After the 3rd funeral, Arabella sent the doctor away with money folded into his hand and did not call him again. The next week, the cellar door was locked from the inside. An enslaved man named Isaac, in one account, in another, the name is Elias, told a Freedmen's Bureau agent 25 years later that Mrs. Mason asked for a table to be moved downstairs. Not a kitchen table, a butcher's table, he called it, a heavy slab with grooves in it. She told him to bring it in the morning and to be careful not to scrape the banister. When he paused, she jangled the key at her neck and asked, in a neutral voice, whether he thought himself more delicate than she was. He brought the table. He saw jars on the shelves. Some held snakes. Some held things that looked like slow flowers. He saw a book open with plates of the eye. He saw a set of instruments with bright edges laid on linen. When he left, the door clicked behind him, and his shoulder blades itched as he crossed the yard. In the summer nights of 1843, people on the neighboring properties began to hear noises. Men who slept on pallets near the gin swore and rolled over. Women nursing babies pressed their lips to their children's heads and sang nonsense songs. One night, this was July, someone in the Mason yard began to pray. Not the tidy prayers of Sunday, but the old prayers. The call and answer you use when you think the air itself is listening. The praying stopped with a thud. The next morning, the man who led the prayer was gone. The overseer told the people to say he had run. He showed them the fence wire cut with a knife. The knife came from the big house kitchen. Arabella was seen, that season, walking with a doctor who was not the one who had attended her husband. He was young, with a look of determination people mistake for goodness. He had come to Natchez to learn, the kind of man who thought the world would let him have his way. because the world had thus far done exactly that. We will call him S, because his initials are all that survive. He admired the candelabra in the Mason parlor, and he admired the way Arabella's mind was sharper than the silver. He told a friend that she was unusually read for a woman. The friend, the barber's brother, told his wife. By nightfall, half of Natchez knew a doctor was sitting in a widow's parlor talking science, which could either be virtuous or ruinous depending on who was telling it. In August, he stopped calling at the big house. In September, someone pried up a floorboard in the courthouse and found a folded paper with his hand on it, ready to be delivered and then, somehow, not delivered, on certain procedures conducted at Mason Place not conformable to law or decency. No details, only a list of names: Dinah, Peter, a man called Jonah who worked the river road, bodies obtained without ordained permission. He wrote, work done while the subject still. The last word is torn away at the fold. You can read that line two ways. In a city accustomed to death, it could be post-mortem. It could also be something else. Whatever the truth, a doctor with nothing to gain and everything to lose had taken his concern to the magistrate. Natchez, with everything to lose and nothing to gain by listening, thought about it and looked away. He tried again. On a Monday, he walked to the courthouse just after noon. He passed the tailors, the printers, the woman who sold plum cakes from a tray. He passed the jail, where 3 men lay with their heads against the bars. He passed the barber who closed his eyes when he saw him, as if to unsee what he was about to witness. At the corner, a carriage pulled into his path. Inside, a woman wearing gloves to the elbow looked straight ahead. The driver raised his whip. The horse reared. The doctor stepped back quickly to avoid the wheel. In turning, he lost his footing. He reached out to steady himself. Someone's hand steadied him. It might have been the driver's. It might have been a hand that came from nowhere at all. He regained his balance. The carriage moved on. The doctor stood in the street, breathing hard, and then, as if nothing had happened, he went on. He filed his report. He went down the hill toward the river, and he vanished. When stories like this begin to move, they pick up details the way floodwaters pick up branches, chairs, the odd bright thing, a hat found or not found, a line in a river pilot's log, a flatboat hand who swore he saw a man's shoes, muddy and new, wedged under a piling. What we have is the fact of his initialed report. What we have is the fact that he did not appear again at his boarding house. What we have is silence. In 1844, a shipment arrived at the Mason place. 2 crates marked glass fiction, a clerk's joke, filled with jars and a length of rubber tube that a man in New Orleans had written to say could convey air into lungs. Exciting times, he wrote. New devices. It was the year before ether would first be showcased in Boston. It was too early to bring relief to the room, where the cellar door had to be unlocked. It was just in time for someone who wanted to practice forcing air into bodies that were not quite finished breathing. There was a night, the 3rd Tuesday of October, people said, when the kitchen girl was sent with a pail to the well and returned shaking so badly the dipper rattled against the tin. She had heard a sound like a violin played underneath the floor, but no violin player would wish to hear himself make such a sound. The mistress sent her to her pallet with a slice of bread and told her to lie flat until she stopped imagining foolishness. In 1845, a man in a calico vest who sold gauze and needles and quinine to the plantations dropped off a package with a sealed envelope and said it was scientific matter and needed to be kept out of the sun. The coachman took it downstairs while the mistress watched from the head of the stairs, face hard with concentration. When he came back up, he did not remember the stairs, only the feeling of the air down there, as if the cellar had its own weather. In April, a freedwoman who took in laundry for the houses on the bluff told her sister she had been asked to wash cloths that looked like surgery and smelled like the inside of a tooth. She burned the wash instead. The mistress sent for another washer. That year, the ledger ran 3 notices of Negroes missing or stolen, men thought to have taken to the river, women perhaps tempted by traders promising better conditions upriver, One of the notices was paid for by the Mason overseer. The names in it matched two of the names in the doctor's torn complaint. In 1846, heavy rains came. The ground at the Mason place swelled and sank like something breathing underneath it. An erosion gully opened near the creek. Bones rolled out. The sheriff came soft-footed and pushed them back with his boot. He told the overseer to arrange a proper burial and told the overseer's boy to keep his mouth shut unless he wanted to be sent to the fields to work his hands to rope. Later, the sheriff wrote a line in his own book: "Grave robbers at work in the county. Signs of their trade. Increased vigilance advised." It is a neat bit of bureaucratic magic. See the thing and call it by something else. If there were skulls among those bones, if there were marks on them that suggested cutting, the report does not say. In 1847, things came to a head. The cellar door was kept locked at all hours. The yard boy said he saw a man he did not know leave by that door at noon, glance at the sun, and go away quickly. That night, the sound under the floor returned, more frenetic than anyone had ever heard it. It had rhythm to it, like someone trying to pray and breathe at once. Then, a quiet. The kind of quiet you hear after a storm, when everything that can be blown down has been blown down, and the birds are considering whether to trust the sky again. The next morning, the coachman asked for the day to take his mother to see a cousin near town. He, too, vanished. 3 days later, his wife received a parcel wrapped in newspaper, tied with string, containing the shoes she had saved a whole season to buy him for Christmas. They looked as if a child had washed them, as if someone had once dipped them in water and then dried them by a fire. She never wore those shoes herself. She put them under her pallet and slept with her feet pressed against the leather. If you walk the path from the kitchen to the quarters, as it was then, and stand where a row of pickets once separated the yard from the garden, you can see the big house, the carriage circle, the edges of a life meant to impress visitors. You cannot see the cellar door from there. That was the point. What happened beneath the house did not touch the grass, except sometimes after rain, when the ground under the lone pecan sagged, as if something down there had drunk too much of the sky. The last clear sighting of Arabella in that period was at a funeral. She stood in black, veil lifted, lips pale. A woman on the next pew watched her hands. They were steady. After the service, she sent the preacher's wife a jar of preserves and a book of sermons, and she instructed her overseer to let the workers attend a Sunday evening singing. The benevolence of the mistress is a performance. The cellar does not applaud. In the years that followed, the war would come, and with it soldiers and hunger, and the sickening feeling of having built your life on a wound. Before that, though, between 1842 and 1847, a woman in Natchez sealed a door and made people scream, and a young doctor grew a conscience and disappeared, and the paper trail began to fade the way ink does when the damp gets into it, and the rodents chew the edges, and someone, on purpose or in fear, holds a page close to a flame until there is only gray ash where the words should have been. Who tried to stop her? Who tried to expose her? And what exactly was going on below those stairs? The first investigator, if that is the right word, was the doctor we have been calling S. He was not an old hand. He was neither the town's darling nor its crank. He was somewhere in between, the easiest kind of person to erase. His complaint is referenced in the county ledger once. His initials survive in a sister's trunk, and his absence is recorded in nothing more than a boarding house keeper's note. Room released to a Mr. Burke, unpaid for 2 weeks. If a man disappears in a place built on the bodies of people, no one is allowed to count fully. Who will keep count of him? The sheriff did not investigate, or not in any way that left marks. He had other priorities: a jail full of men who owed fines, a riverfront full of fights that spilled under his window, a life built on not seeing what powerful people did in private. He had an understanding with the planters. They did not bring him their problems. He did not bring them attention. A Freedmen's Bureau agent years later, in 1866, did try. He was, like many of those men, both a zealot and a bureaucrat, convinced that forms could rescue what bullets had failed to save. He'd been told by a minister that certain acts were committed at the Mason place before the war, and that people freed by the 13th Amendment wanted to speak. Now, at last, but feared retribution by the same men who used to hold the whip and now held the deputy's badge. He took down statements. He wrote, Isaac, on one, Elias, on another. He asked careful questions. He did not press. He promised, perhaps naively, that names could be protected and justice would be done. Then the Bureau cut his position. His papers were boxed, moved, and, according to a cover sheet decades later, partly consumed in an accidental fire. Whether the fire was accidental is one of those mysteries all small towns have. Like why the cousin who everyone knew took money from a church collection never went to jail. In the 1930s, a WPA writer placing pins in a map of Mississippi oral histories had a conversation under a pecan tree with a woman whose grandmother had worked in the Mason kitchen. The woman said the cellar made her grandmother's mouth go tight even when she was very old. She say white lady got a school in she house. The woman recalled, say she learn on folks like they was hogs. The writer, being trained to be careful, added a line, prob, exaggeration, emotional. He moved on to the next town, and the paper with the note went to a box that now sits, unindexed, in a university library 2 states away. So what are the theories that try to make sense of a handful of facts and a ghost story that refuses to die? Theory 1, the vivisectionist. This is the most awful version, and the one that explains the screams. Arabella conducted surgical experiments on living people she owned. Without anesthesia, either did not arrive until 1846, and even then, the idea of giving it to an enslaved person would have been anathema to many white Southern doctors. Without consent, she studied the human body in the rawest way possible. This theory fits the noises, the odor the washerwoman described, the quicklime, the shipments of glass, the instruments laid on linen. It also fits the idea that a young doctor could not abide what he saw and tried to stop it. It is, if true, more than a mystery. It is a crime so immense that the word study collapses. Theory 2, the anatomical broker. In this version, Arabella was not the primary violator but the facilitator. Because she had space, money, and privacy, she stored bodies, likely black bodies obtained by theft, or by purchasing the dead from potters' fields, for sale to medical schools in New Orleans. She prepared them, she preserved them. The screams heard by neighbors were from punishments elsewhere on the property or from childbirths. The kinds of noises plantation acoustics carried, and the cellar's true offense was a commerce carried out by other planters across the South, but done here by a woman, and with too little discretion. The doctor's outrage, in this theory, is moral but not specific. His disappearance is the community's way of signaling to reformers that there are prices to be paid for meddling. Theory 3, the disguised murders. The overseer, often the plantation's true power, committed acts of violence that led to death, and the mistress, whether out of fear, loyalty to the memory of her husband's arrangements, or a cold practicality, used anatomical study as a cover to dispose of bodies. The jars, the books, the language, all theater. Under the floor, she hid the fact that people were being killed above it. The doctor stumbled upon the truth, attached to the most fashionable idea he had, science, and paid for it with his life. Theory 4, the misunderstood naturalist. Women collected things in parlors. Women had cabinets of curiosities. Women pressed flowers. Women kept jars of fish in spirits that their husbands fetched from New Orleans to keep them from boredom. Wealthy women had a strange luxury, the freedom to appear odd, if what they did not threaten men. In this version, Arabella never cut into anyone living or dead. She preserved animals and perhaps a fetus lost in pregnancy. The noises were something else: a sick horse, a fox, a cruel overseer meting out punishment in a separate yard. The doctor's complaint was either a mistake. He saw a tray of instruments and reached for a theory, or a lie told by a man who wanted her humiliated. His disappearance had more to do with river gambling and less to do with virtue. Theory 5, the student of racial science. The 1840s saw the flowering of American racial pseudoscience. Samuel Morton measured skulls in Philadelphia. Louis Agassiz classified human beings as if they were butterflies, Southern readers devoured books that told them that the people they owned were a different order of being. If Arabella, educated and curious, took those books too literally, she could have collected skulls and bones from enslaved graveyards under the guise of knowledge. She could have convinced herself that she was doing what gentlemen in the North were doing with the remains of the poor. The screams become less explainable, but the jars and the quicklime align with a person who thought herself a scientist without any recognition of the human cost. Which of these is true? Pieces of several of them can be argued from what we know between 1842 and 1847. The Mason place received shipments of preservative spirits and equipment, not strictly necessary for running a plantation. The cellar was modified during those years and locked in a way that suggests something valuable or illicit lay below. Multiple neighbor accounts, some preserved in letters, more in oral recall, speak of nocturnal cries in the vicinity of the big house. A young physician submitted a complaint regarding improper medical practices at the Mason place and disappeared immediately afterward. After the war, the Mason plantation records do not survive. A clerk in the county office in 1868 wrote, "Most records rescued, some burned prior. Which records and by whose hand is left to imagination and inference." The Mason family plot contains an unmarked grave purchased by Arabella. No name, no dates. Natchez custom allows such a thing for a number of reasons: penitence, pride, scandal, madness. It is also a way to bury a story with a body. The records called it misfortune. The locals whispered something else entirely. The most unsettling possibility is less a single "what happened" than a "why no one stopped it." In a culture built to not see certain people as fully human, a woman with money could do almost anything if she wrapped it in the language of improvement. The doctor's disappearance is not proof so much as a symptom. A healthy system would have taken his complaint and examined it. A diseased system devoured him and carried on. The war ended and the country declared itself new. But archives are not reborn with treaties, they retain their stains. Union troops occupied Natchez early, in 1862. The big houses survived in ways others across Mississippi did not. Their owners signed oaths, hid silver in wells, complained in diaries about officers who insisted on using parlors as offices. Some left, some adapted. All of them learned that the North's victory did not mean the end of local arrangements. The Mason place did not burn. Its books did. A rumor, half-breathed at a hardware counter in 1866, had Mr. Mason's cousin, back from the war without a leg, spending a night carrying ledgers out to the yard and feeding them into a barrel fire. "Too much in there no Yankee needs to see," he is supposed to have said. Another rumor had it that a pair of black men were paid to take a heavy chest into the ravine. When they asked for their wages, they were told the Bureau had forbidden wages for men like them. They disappeared. Whether that story is revenge gossip or a grim footnote, the effect is the same: records gone, accountability smothered under ash. In 1877, as Reconstruction's last protection was withdrawn, a county clerk boxed up sensitive materials and placed them in a locked cabinet with a note to remain sealed without special order. The ledger with the doctor's line was among them. The key to the cabinet hung from a hook behind the clerk's desk for decades. There were Saturday mornings when he opened the doors to impress a friend. There were evenings when a deputy napped beneath it. There was one night, the night the electric lights were first installed in the building, when a clerk's boy, showing off, pulled the ledger out to display the antiquated loops of a signature and tore a corner by accident. In that tear lies the last half of the doctor's most important sentence. Arabella's grave is a smooth stone the size of a loaf of bread cut from light granite. It sits in the Mason plot beneath a live oak that throws good shade. There is no name. There is a date of purchase in the cemetery record book and a sum paid. On either side of the blank stone are names that still carry weight in Natchez. Men whose portraits hang in the courthouse with eyes painted to follow you. The blankness of her marker reads as a choice. It could also be a sentence passed by a family that preferred that she be remembered as nothing in public and in their prayers as no one. The basement remains, The house has changed owners a dozen times since the war. The cellar was bricked up sometime in the 1880s and reopened in the 1920s by men installing a furnace. They told their wives they found only empty jars and a few broken stoppers, the glass cloudy with age. They told their sons there was nothing worth seeing down there. In 1969, a preservationist mapped the house for a paper to be presented at a historical society luncheon and drew the cellar as a dotted rectangle because she was told, politely, that it was unsuitable for ladies. In 1982, a developer considered turning the place into a bed and breakfast and had a contractor go below to appraise the foundation. The contractor quit a week later without giving a reason. He was seen at a lunch counter looking into a cup of coffee, as if the surface would tell him something if he stared hard enough. The story persists in the places where facts don't go. Children are told not to walk under the pecan after rain. Teenagers park on the gravel near the old carriage house and dare each other to knock on the cellar door. She'll open it, one says. She'll take you down, another says. Old women on swings refuse to name the house when they gossip and describe it instead. You know, the one with the magnolia that never blooms right, always 2 weeks early or 2 weeks late, like it's remembering the wrong season. Among black families whose great-grandparents worked the bluff, there are still strict rules about that house. A man in his 70s tells his granddaughter to cross the street when she passes it. A woman in her 80s says, "Don't you stand there, baby." That yard know too much. There is a broader legacy too, not confined to a parcel of land in Natchez. It lives in the way Southern medicine grew and prospered through unconsenting bodies, in the way American medicine justified itself by deciding who counted as willing. It lives in the skulls measured and displayed without thought to the lives that carried them. It lives in the fact that the dead of the poor and the dead of the enslaved were treated as raw material, and that the line between healing and harm was very often drawn where the skin turned from pale to dark. Stories like Arabella's are uncomfortable not only because of what she may have done, but because of the way her community made room for it. A man disappears, not a low man, not a person the legal system is practiced at ignoring, but a doctor, and the gears keep turning. A woman orders quicklime and jars. A clerk makes a note and then makes no more notes. A preacher thanks her for preserves. A neighbor holds a hand to her chest at the sound from below the kitchen, and later tells herself it was the old thick ice thawing in its trough. If you love the South, and many do despite everything, because the human heart is complicated, you know this pattern. Memory is curated. Ghosts are housed in mansions and made to behave for the tour. The cellar is a place where servants once kept potatoes and laughter, not a room where a woman with clean gloves did unclean work. The past is arranged so that what we love can be loved without qualification. But some doors resist being painted shut. Some keys rattle on their blue ribbon. Some blanks in the record glare like missing teeth. The Mason cellar is one of those places where the air changes when you step onto the lowest stair. You cannot see what happened down there. You can feel, in the pause before the next breath, the way the room is shaped around an absence. Perhaps the truth still lies hidden, in archives misfiled under benign headings, in a diary entry misread as a recipe, in a box in a university basement no one has yet ordered to the reading room, in a winter yard beneath a pecan tree where the ground goes soft after rain and does not tell you why. Perhaps it lies in the one street ledger line that does not fit, the name of a jar maker scratched in by a clerk who was bored that day. Perhaps it lies in the stories elders tell and children dismiss, until they find themselves at 30 examining their own lives and realizing that forgetting is not the same as safety. The legacy of Arabella Mason is not only the legend of an aristocratic woman with a key around her neck and a taste for science she had no right to. It is a case study in how entire communities are built to protect certain people from consequence. It is a warning about how easily words like anatomical studies can mask cruelty. It is a mirror that reflects unkindly the ways we still avert our eyes from things done in our name by people we admire. So, what do you think happened beneath the Mason house? Was Arabella a true believer in a perverse vision of science, pushing beyond moral limits because no one around her would say no? Was she a broker for a quiet trade that nearly every medical man of her time participated in, and that her community tolerated until it wanted a story to bury? Or was the cellar a stage for a more ordinary cruelty, its jars and instruments a mask that let everyone pretend the screams had an explanation more civilized than the whip? Which theory makes the most sense to you? And what detail disturbed you the most? If this investigation gave you chills, drop a comment, like the video, and subscribe for more deep dives into America's darkest historical mysteries. Ring the bell so you never miss an episode, and tell us where you're listening from. We've got stories hiding in plain sight in every state. And in our next episode, we'll uncover another chapter erased from history, a New England mill town that swore its children simply wandered off in winter, and the factory ledger that counts boots instead of boys. You don't want to miss it.